All right, so this is for the Research Assistance Discussion Group on Tuesdays from 9 a.m. to noon. This is October 23rd, 2018. Some of you may have already heard some of this topic covered with some of the other groups. We're going to begin going over Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering by Robin D. Laws, L-A-W-S. This is a Steve Jackson Games publication. I believe it's from the year 2000. 2002. 2002. It's not currently in print, but it's not too hard to find online. It's 33 pages. So it's a booklet, a small booklet, mid-sized booklet. And it brings up lots of interesting topics that we've discussed over the years, or with you guys over the last few months, regarding play style, archetypes, etc. Now, he does it from, a GURPS-centric perspective, which is good to get something that's not focused on D&D necessarily, though he brings up D&D as well. So he opens up with, "The Great Immutable Ironclad Law. Game designers, yours truly included, are an egotistical, control-hungry breed. That's why we prefer to avoid contemplating a certain essential truth of the role-playing game. When you look at the various factors that determine whether any given group of players has a good gaming experience on any particular night, all of our efforts account for, at the absolute, outside best, maybe 30% of the equation. Our lovingly crafted rules sets, our peerless prose, the hours upon hours of playtesting, the painstaking research, the time we sweat away messing with minor details on all of those freaking maps, all of it matters way less than we like to think." Sidebar. This is not a primer. This book assumes at least a glancing familiarity with the fundamental concepts of role-playing. Space is limited, so I'm not going to repeat the basic lessons on GMing found in various core rules sets. You've played enough games to know a PC from an NPC. You know what an adventure is and can tell a dungeon crawl from a mystery. Over time, you've learned to spot the quirks of style that differentiate the various players in your group. Although you may find it useful in making the leap from player to GM, this book is primarily intended to sharpen your skills after you've been running games for a while. If the advice here seems a bit daunting, just go off and play for a bit and develop your own ways of doing things. After doing that, come back and see if my resounding jibber-jabber makes more sense. Don't ever feel like a bad or inadequate GM because you don't follow the advice given in this or any other book. If you're having fun, you're doing it right. What really makes a difference in the success or failure of a role-playing session is your participation, whether as GM or player, has much more influence on the fun of your group than all the other game products in the world. Rulebooks are not role-playing games any more than a screenplay is a movie. The reams of material game companies provides but a blueprint for the real thing. The role-playing game doesn't start until a bunch of people sit down, open up their dice bags, riffle their character sheets, and wait for the GM to clear their voice and say, "Okay, last week you'd all gotten into the escape pod and ejected yourselves into the heart of the Glengarry Nebula, ... So I like his, I agree with, because I've always emphasized that role-playing is a verb. Role-playing game is the activity of doing a role-playing game. So usually I say role-playing gaming as a verb as opposed to the role-playing game, the noun, which includes all the rule books and source material, etc. He's just calling it, it doesn't actually become something until it is the verb. And by the way, feel free to interrupt when thoughts occur to you. This is meant to be interactive, not just a straight reading. So with the other groups, people just went, "Oh, wait a minute, I have a thought or a comment." So please do interrupt. Do you have any thoughts or comments so far on what we just covered?
No, I'm just enthralled.
By?
Well, I GM'd in the past, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to see what his thoughts and comments are.
Okay.
A lot of people have been asking me recently about RPGs, specifically tabletop, and how to have better games and
Yep.
DM better, and I'm like, I'm getting there.
Yep.
So I'm excited to get to some of the meat of that.
Good. Well, and I've got to get that book published by the end of December. for the RPG Professionals Handbook, and it covers a lot of these topics in much more depth because it's a 300-page book. So, and it also assumes that you already have prior gaming experience, and it's just trying to take it to the professional level. Omar, thoughts, questions, comments?
I've also jammed in the past, but very poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just refused to follow the rule books for some reason. I think it's just more fun to do whatever the party wants to do.
Okay.
So I'm not enthralled as much, just afraid to see.
Okay. And let me tell you a little bit about him. Robin D. Laws has served as designer or lead designer for such role-playing games, which I've not heard of most of these games, by the way, or only heard of them in passing. Feng Shui, Rune, Hero Wars, and Dying Earth. He's also a regular columnist for Dragon Magazine, was soon to take on similar duties for Star Wars Gamer, another magazine, in addition to oodles of adventures and supplements for companies like White Wolf, FASA, Pinnacle, Last Unicorn, and Wizards of the Coast. He worked on the collectible card game Shadow Fist and the computer game King of Dragon Pass. I love this next part. With cruel and mercenary intent, he urges you to check out his novels Pierced Heart and The Rough and the Smooth. The latter is the heartwarming tale of two anthropomorphic naked mole rats and the hideous carnage that ensues when they involve themselves in human politics. Robin is pleased to once again appear under the banner of Steve Jackson Games, who years ago published his first full-length book, the legendarily twisted and freakish GURPS Fantasy II Adventures in the Mad Lands. So keep that in mind about his perspective. This is just one of many potential perspectives, and I do elaborate as we go. I have a lot of highlighted and notated sections in the book about my thoughts on his comments, so that you can get multiple perspectives. And I welcome yours as well, and anybody who's on the stream watching, I welcome your comments as well. So, what he's saying, that the game doesn't really start until everybody's gathered. This is both the blessing and the curse of the role-playing form. In a culture increasingly driven towards passive consumption of exhaustively researched mass-market entertainments, gamers take part in a form that not only rewards, but demands active participation. And that really lines up well with therapeutic recreation philosophies. What happens on any given night may not be as polished or quickly paced as even a middling episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but it's great because it's yours. It's the active participation, the mixture that arises from the interplay between your thinking and your imagination, that makes role-playing so vital and special. Ironically, it is this very strength that will prevent role-playing from ever becoming a mass phenomenon. So I disagree with him on that, and I think we're really starting to see that changing. Someday we'll probably find ourselves making regular treks to our local multiplexes to see movie versions of our favorite role-playing properties up on the big screen, but that won't be the same. Maybe the interactivity of the internet or the cultural seeds planted by Pokemon will make new generations more receptive to our elusive and delightful hobby, which is yes, because remember this is in 2002, and we have seen that it's being more culturally accepted than before, and slowly phasing out some of the stigma. Now, question, Eric, and I asked this of the other groups, how many movies, out of your general media consumption of movies, how many movies do you actually watch in a movie theater as opposed to, it looks like I'm overdriving the audio here, darn it, as opposed to, streaming and everything else? How much do you actually go to a movie theater to watch?
Percentage-wise?
Yeah.
Probably about, right now it's about 60-40. It's more so going to the theater.
Oh, really?
Yes, and that's going to rapidly change as MoviePass drives itself into a hole and slowly dies.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what it has been doing.
Oh, because you got the subscription?
I did.
Ah.
Because of the subscription, I was motivated to go see movies again.
So before you did the subscription, what would you say the percentage was?
It was probably 80-20 at home.
80% at home, 20%, 80% at home, 20% at the theaters? Okay. So that gamble
That would
worked.
be a little skewed because
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, because the subscription program with this expense kind of being cut out of it, it was definitely a huge shift toward going to the theater.
Right. Yeah, that's what they hoped for, is to get people to come back. But you say it's going to drive itself into the hole. Why do you say that? I understand what you're saying, but share it with the others.
Basically, their mission was to get people to go to the movies and enjoy themselves and go when they want, where they want, and whatever movie they want. And that has changed.
Right.
The app hardly works. So even if you want to go to something, they have a schedule of movies you can see now. So there's a few movies a day that you can go see on their app. Usually they're not working. So even if you want to go, you can't go. So they've just been doing a lot of sketchy things. They've been changing things rapidly, and it seems like they're moving away from their core mission idea in order to make money, so that they can stay afloat.
And they're going to kill the goose that's laying the golden egg in the process.
Right. So for the few months that I was in the golden age of MoviePass, it was awesome. But right now they're plummeting downhill fast. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of it, because it's clear that people really like the idea and they want a service like this.
Yeah, subscription model is what subscription model is what everybody's been moving to with everything else, and it's interesting how resistant they were for so long. And it seems to be working for them, but now they're tightening the constraints because they don't like the margins.
Right. And they've had a couple of times where they had a significant outage, I think, in August of this year, where everything was down simply because they didn't pay their bills.
Oh, wow. Well, that doesn't bode well.
So since then, it's been just an absolute chaos.
Okay.
But the movie companies themselves are the chains, the theater chains, like Regal and AMC have been looking into doing their own subscription services. There's others like Cinemia that have been popping up.
Right.
Kind of.
And so what is it you like, other than that they gave you a subscription option, what is it you like about going to the theater versus just doing it in the comfort of your own home?
It's an experience. It's something that you go out and
to,
do.
To get you out of the house.
Right.
Yeah.
I personally think it's fun to see how other people react to.
Okay. So the shared communal experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Plus popcorn.
Okay. Omar, you're in Saudi Arabia. What is movie going like there?
There are no movies there. There's no cinemas.
What?
Yeah, there aren't. Apparently, there was up until the 70s, but something happened and they took them all out. They're starting to slowly reintroduce them.
Really?
Yeah, I'm half Egyptian, so I used to go to Egypt every single vacation, and Egypt cinema there is huge.
Okay.
Because it's so cheap, it's like less than $1.
Oh wow.
It's not like a great theater, but again, it's less than $1.
Sure, yeah.
I used to go a lot when I was a kid, and I used to love it. But nowadays, I'm kind of like Eric, where I don't really watch that many movies, period.
Okay.
So I only tend to go if it's a horror movie that I really want to see.
Oh, okay.
Or an action movie.
All right.
So I think those are the only two that I want to see.
That give you more of an immersive experience to get more scared and more into the action?
Yes, like I saw the John Krasinski movie, the horror one. What was it called? The one where they can't make a sound.
I don't know.
I know what you're talking about with the guy from The Office.
Yeah. Anyways, I can't imagine having seen that not in the cinema, because that was such a good experience.
Okay. So I take it you don't have a home.
First,
you don't have a home theater system.
Well, in England, I kind of do, because there was just one that's really close.
Okay.
When I used to live there. Yeah, we don't really have loyalty to a theater. It's whatever's closest to you, really.
Right. No, a home theater system is where you've set up basically a theater experience in your house.
Sorry, I didn't hear the home part.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I have a giant computer that I just watch everything on.
Okay. Okay.
I haven't had a TV in 5 years, which is my recent realization.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's
I don't really
interesting.
miss it either.
Right, right, and that's increasingly. That's where his comments about the multiplex and everything is a bit dated from 2002, because streaming. Remember, the internet still wasn't robust enough. That streaming was very limited back then. You didn't have all these streaming services that we have now with Netflix and even YouTube and all these others were really not. You know, the internet was still really. We were still having brownouts over the internet.
I do remember back in like 2003, 2004, we did have a home theater. It's a massive.
Yeah, and I have a couple of them. I have one both upstairs and downstairs, because it would when we do our.
Like you said, it's the internet just took over. There's really no.
Well, I use DVDs and stuff. I don't because I like to own my media. I really don't like the subscription model. Also, because I talked before about my boycott of the MPAA. So I have to go through. I get used stuff and everything to avoid, because then they don't get, that way I'm not funding the MPAA directly, etc. Blah blah blah. But because the streaming services, you're at the mercy of what's available, and if your internet connection's down, you're out of luck, or if it's choking that day or whatever. And so I like being able to stick in the DVD, or if it's on a hard drive as a DVR, that's fine too. But I like owning the media. I do not like the subscription thing because of the whole clawback thing. Amazon in the early days of the Kindle, I don't know how much they do it now, but they would claw back. A book would get released, and then it would be controversial or whatever, and they would remove it from your device, even though you paid for it and owned it. And they might give you back your money, but but if you wanted to keep that book. And that just really sticks in my craw. So I have a huge DVD collection, and a not too small VHS collection from leftover from the 90s and such. Yeah, and it's slowly growing Blu-ray, but I don't like the Blu-ray spyware and everything that's built in, being a privacy advocate.
And the subscription service is so popular.
It is. That's what everybody's going with. And that's what everybody they have dreamed about that for decades. They've tried to push it multiple times, and it's finally starting to stick with especially younger generations, because that way it's recurring revenue. Because when you own it, this is the same problem with role-playing games. Tabletop role-playing games. You buy the books, you never have to buy another item if you don't want to. You buy the core books, you can just build on it indefinitely and reuse them infinitely. Same thing with the DVDs. It's short of them wearing out. You can watch as many times as you want and never have to buy another one again. And I have some favorite movies. What's that?
I think a lot of people, especially the younger generation, don't rewatch, or they don't.
Yeah, they're consuming. Yeah, they're on kind of a short attention span too, because of this constant influx.
That sort of situation, they don't need to own.
Yeah.
The meat in order to.
Well, anything. They don't need to own anything, because they're also not into cars and home ownership, and it's a much more transient lifestyle.
Like you've seen around town the Lime scooters.
The what?
I've seen the Lime scooters by now.
I haven't been downtown very much. Are these like scooters they're just leaving lying around for people to use?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw those all through California and stuff. When I was in California, they were everywhere.
Yeah, they popped up. They've been very, very popular here for the last.
Yeah, and you just leave them and you just swipe a card for $1 and then scoot along, right?
Yep.
Yep. It's very different. My boys have only retroactively, except for my youngest, gotten into cars as they've realized the practicality of if they want to make a real income, they need to have self-portable.
And then I'd read a couple of things that there's just been a shift in taste.
Yeah.
Where it's less about the object or the physical thing and more about the experience.
Right. Right.
People are willing to pay for experiences now rather than to pay for things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Which again is a transient thing. It's much more transient. There's less continuous existence. It is, as you say, it's experiential, which is very transient. is interesting.
That's why millennials are killing every mark.
What's that?
That's why millennials kill every mark.
Yeah.
They're not interested in things.
Yeah. Well, they're creating other markets, so the times they are a changing. So anyway, so his comments about that role playing will never become a mass phenomenon. Well, that is an experiential thing, and it's an ongoing new experience. And I think we're going to keep seeing that growing. Certainly, if we have anything to do with it, I hope it does become mass phenomenon again.
I definitely haven't noticed any big RPG movies, so his prediction there may have been a little.
No, there have been 3 Dungeons and Dragons movies, and there have been quite a few other movies that were based on role-playing games. Pathfinder had their own. There's a lot of them have been released through private sales, DVDs, or the web. So there's quite a few role-playing game movies out there. There's one. Oh goodness gracious! I have it here in my 3.5 stuff. Midnight Chronicles. To introduce players to the game, they made a movie. Fantasy Flight Games made a movie to introduce you to the world setting. It's basically the concept is if Sauron had won, what would Middle Earth look like? Except it's not Middle Earth, but it's basically that concept. And so there'd just be a few bastions left of resistance, but everything else would be controlled by the Dark Lord. And it's a very dystopic fantasy setting. And so to set the mood for that, they have a movie you actually just watch, DVD, and it's a full length, close to feature length film, shorter feature length. And the players watch it, and now they know what the world is like, and now they can whip up characters with the understanding of what the setting is like. So that's an interesting approach they did, and their series was pretty popular through the D&D 3.5 era, and it's pretty fun. And the movie was pretty good production value for being self-produced by a game company. D&D's released, I think, 3 or 4 D&D movies. The first one was awful in the 90s. The others didn't do really well, but some of them were actually better quality than the first one. The first one was so cheesy. The other ones were a little closer to your typical fantasy adventure. And they were specifically D&D, and so all the magic you recognize, the creatures you recognize, etc. And they didn't catch on like the superhero movies have, but they're out there, and some people enjoy them. And there have been a number of other movies that were loosely or closely, like, did you ever see Willow?
I can't recall.
Omar? Do we lose Omar? Omar. Hello? Uh-oh. I think he's having internet issues. I don't hear him at all. Come back to us, Omar. Try. I don't. So, Omar, if you can hear us, try disconnecting and reconnecting. Like, try hanging up the audio and then reconnecting.
Just as a sidebar, you can force a reconnection of everyone by changing the server of your Discord.
Okay, but this appears to be specific to Omar's connection because you and I haven't been.
Hello.
Hi there, welcome back.
You just keep cutting out from me. I'm not sure why.
It's just you.
I don't know what's up with it.
Try hanging up and closing Discord out completely, and then reconnecting with Discord again.
Okay, just a second.
You bet.
It's one of my favorite features is just popping over to a different Discord server to refresh everything.
Okay.
Especially handy for outages when you're with a large group of people trying to get, I don't know, a raid or something. No.
Yep. Welcome back, Omar.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here, but
Yep.
it'll be fine now.
All right. Hopefully it'll behave. What was the last thing you heard us discussing, Omar?
What RPG movies there were?
Yeah. So yeah, there's three or more Dungeons and Dragons movies. There's a Pathfinder movie. There's a Midnight Chronicles movie, which was designed specifically as an introduction to the game. There have been a number of them, and though it wasn't really made as a role-playing game, the movie Willow by George Lucas and Ron Howard, back in 1988. It's a very fun romp. It is like your typical fun D&D adventure, and he originally conceived the idea back in '72. Lucas did. So predating D&D, but certainly a lot of the concepts. And then when they worked, I guess, together on Cocoon or something, that's when they started talking about it and started putting it together. And they did later make a role-playing game of it for the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES and such, as well as others, Commodore 64, etc. Then action game and then the role-playing game. But even though it wasn't specifically a role-playing game movie, it it feels like one. And there have been a number that definitely... okay, here's one. Are you familiar with this science fiction series on sci-fi called The Expanse?
I am also not.
Omar?
I don't know.
Okay. There's a great series called The Expanse. One of the things is it's very gritty. It tries to be as realistic about space physics as possible, so it's pretty brutal. So it's a near future where we've spread out through the solar system out to the Mars belt and Jupiter moons and have settled those areas. And you have people living, mining the belts and then sending the resources back to Earth and Mars, etc. And you've created a strata of hierarchy and castes and such between the Belters, the Martians, and Earth. And anyway, originally they wanted to do it as a video role-playing game for some Chinese company, but they didn't have the money. So then they released it as a series of books. And the books did well enough that eventually it was picked up, and now they're on their third, or I think they finished their third season, and I think they're going forward to their fourth season. It's very popular. And they just did a Kickstarter this summer, which I did support. They've come full circle to fund the tabletop role-playing game, The Expanse. So they've kind of come full circle. So there are a lot of influences, a lot of people who are role-playing gamers. If you look at our list of famous people who are role-playing gamers, you'll see people like George Lucas and many others who are role-playing gamers, and it shows up in the influences. And, of course, even though it was horribly done, Ready Player One, of course, is based on the whole gamer environment, though not specifically role-playing gaming. It comes up a lot. And
What are you talking about? That had the most fan service of anything I've ever seen.
oh boy, did it have lots of fan service. So
Fan service, it was just like telling us things existed in media.
yeah, which is the same thing. The book was that way. I did not get into it as like everybody that. So some of the younger staff was in their early 20s, late teens, was so excited about the book. And like, you got to read this, you got to read this. I'm like, all right, I'll read it. And actually I listened to the one that was read by Will Wheaton because I figured that would add the extra geek culture aspect, especially the self-referencing of himself in it. But it was like nostalgia for nostalgia's sake from somebody who clearly had not lived through it. It was really surreal. I grew up with everything that was being referenced, and the way it was being referenced in this idealized way, it was very odd. But the story itself really dragged because they spent so much time saying, "Cool, look at this reference I get. Cool, look at this reference I get," and then that was most of the book, spending an awful lot of time on that. And then a veneer of character development and story development, etc. I mean, it wasn't terrible. It was a fluffy, fun romp, but left a lot to be desired. But anyway, they are out there. But yeah, they haven't been huge. But I think it's really not that different. As popular as superheroes have become in the movies, because of comic books, etc. I think we'll increasingly see that as the quality gets better for some of the role-playing gaming and such. And the key thing for that is more people do it, the more money there is, the better the opportunities available. Anyway, so we'll so what he said about movieplexes, I think, will be diminishing over time, unless, as you said, they make it a better experiential thing to bring people back. I think it's just going to be more and more streaming and phones. I mean, it's going to phones like crazy, except for streamcasting it back to a big screen so you have a better experience. But I do agree with him that it's not the same. Watching it on a film or on your phone or in a cast or even in the theater just isn't the same as when you're doing it together as a social experience. Now, what they did with Pokemon and with the others and this is before Pokemon Go, that he's talking about 2002, but this is before Pokemon Go, where that added a real-world aspect that tied things in. Things like that, AR and VR, which we are researching as well, definitely are going to enhance that experience. Although it's again a different experience unto itself. So continuing on, if role-playing is to grow creatively, game designers will have to continue to experiment and push the limits, just as painters, musicians, and authors have done ever since their respective fields were born. But if we're to improve the quality of individual games and the overall popularity of the form, we need to look more closely at the other 70% of the experience, the part that arises from each group's individual interactions. Excuse me. Though every player makes a huge contribution to a session, the person with the greatest influence over its success is, guess. The Game Master, yes. At least I assume you're GM, unless a copy of this book has leapt into your hands by its own cruel volition, ... Weirdly, given the number of game books published every year, the techniques of good GMing have never been well communicated in print. By the way, there's the new Monty Cook game that was Kickstarter funded, which we also backed, and they also had referenced us and such, which is about having your best game ever. So that'll be another book coming out in the near future through Monty Cook Games. The GM advice chapter of a new role-playing game is always the first bit to get hacked away when the crunchy rules bits begin to overrun the desired word count, as they inevitably do. Instead, in this all-important area, we revert to an oral culture, passing down the tricks of the art from experienced GM to novice. Insert labored shamanism metaphor here. This tradition, too, contributes to our little subculture's quirky charm, but it has its pitfalls. Just as the details of a sentence are invariably lost and garbled in the grade school game of telephone, the most basic ideas of good GMing too often fail to make it up the stream of communication from one budding game master to the next. So, are you guys familiar with the game Telephone?
Yes.
No.
Okay, I've wanted to check that because some people are not. So Telephone is where everybody's like lined up in a circle or a line. You have a bunch of people, and somebody whispers something into one person's ear. And they might say, 10 more seconds and I'm leaving. And then the next person says that, 10 more seconds and I'm leaving. 10 more seconds and I'm leaving, right? And they pass it down. Well, by the time it comes out the other end, 10 people later, they might say, okay, what did you hear? Earn more leavings by sleeving. Which happens a lot. By the way, I'm quoting Steve Martin's Roxanne there, but which was his version of Cyrano de Bergerac, for those of you who are watching and know what I'm referencing. So it shows how oral communication, like any other communication, can be flawed, and its repetition can get distorted very quickly, and how oral tradition can really change from generation to generation quite radically from how it started. One thing I do want to say, when it talks about good game mastering, the thing I'm about to go on to isn't so much about good game mastering, it's just the basics. But I think I mentioned it before. The best introduction I have seen yet to how to do a role-playing game, like walk you through step by step, hands down, is the Frank Metzer 1983 Red Book Basic D&D. You guys familiar with that at all?
Nope.
So there have been a lot of other like Star Wars boxes and the starter sets from D&D and the others that say, this is all you need to get started and start jamming. But it says read everything all the way through before you try to use it. And that nowadays is way more than a lot of people are willing to commit. So the boxes say, you don't even have to prepare, just run it through. So we've been experimenting with trying these games out. We go and say, they claim we can just run it without preparation. All right, let's try to run through. We've been sharing that on our stream with Star Wars and with other games. And what we're finding is, no, they don't quite live up to it. They may need less preparation than, some classic games, but they definitely require hours of reading and preparation, etc., from the game master. Not so the players can jump in, but for the game master we're talking about here. But back in, you'll want to see the Twitch stream for this in a minute, see the video. Back in 1983, TSR, then, now Wizards of the Coast, published they tried to make, people were complaining that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons had gotten too complicated. So they released the basic Dungeons & Dragons to kind of reset things to be a better introduction for people. And that eventually spun up into what eventually became called BECME, Basic, Expert, Companion, Masters, and Immortals, which took you all the way to 36th plus level, and you could become a god by going through adventures, which was really a lot of fun. But it starts very basic. You had only a few character classes. And kind of did you guys ever see the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon of the 80s, the cheesy 80s cartoon of Dungeons & Dragons? Yep, check it out. Check out the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon from 1980s. It was a regular weekly TV series for like Saturday morning cartoons. Gary Gygax was running that in Hollywood, and that's when he got hooked on cocaine and women and was spending way too much money, and it kind of started to lead to the chain of events that led to him being fired from his own company. But it was a major Hollywood cartoon movie or TV series production. And you can check them out. They're cheesy, but cheesy fun. And these kids they go to a Dungeons and Dragons theme park, and they go into a ride in a tunnel, and then accidentally get transported into the fantasy world of the Dungeons and Dragons world. And then they have to fight an arch nemesis, and so they're modern day kids, but they each have become these character classes that were kind of hybrids of what an actual D&D character class was. And it was, it was cheesy. But yeah, that was a series for a year or two. I think they had 20-something episodes, I forget. Well, anyway, so in 1983, they came out with Basic Dungeons & Dragons, trying to make it a little simpler to introduce people. And they basically start you out with an interactive choose-your-own-adventure. So page 1 of the book, so holding this up here, this is the player's manual. So, there'll be a delay on the Twitch stream for you to see it, but it'll be up there in a moment. And that booklet is only 63 pages. So, and they have text like on the inside of the cover. The page count starts with the table of contents, then a quick introduction of what is role-playing. And then on page 3, you have your first adventure. And it tells you, and it came in a little box set with a basic set of dice. And it tells you start with just very basic stat. You just learn your hit points and your constitution at first. And then it walks you through a little bit of a narrative. So it starts you with your first adventure. Your hometown is just a small place with dirt roads. You set off one morning and hike to the nearby hills. There are several caves in the hills, caves where treasures can be found, guarded by monsters. You have heard that a man named Bargle may also be found in these caves. Bargle is a sort of bandit who has been stealing money, killing people, and terrorizing your town. If you can catch him, you can become a hero. So then you approach, and then as you're approaching, you suddenly see a goblin. He's smaller than you are and looks like an ugly little man with gray skin. He sees you, gives a scream, waves his sword, and attacks. You dodge his blow and raise your sword to swing. If the goblin hadn't attacked right away, you might have tried talking to him. But now you have no choice. You must fight for your life. And then it takes a little brief bit and says how to hit. In the game, whenever you try to hit a monster, there's a chance that you will miss, and of course the chance that you'll be hit. And then it tells you how to roll, and it says if you roll above a certain number or below a certain number, so it walks you through. So then it has you roll, And then it literally has you self-play with the dice roll your very simple battle with the goblin. Then you go, what's that? Did somebody say something?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Omar, are you still with us? Okay. And then you go in a little farther into the dungeon and you come across a snake and you run the risk of getting poisoned, so it teaches you about a saving throw. And then it'll say something like, on your sheet, cross out hit points and write down 8, the full amount you started with, because you used a magic spell to heal and such. And so it walks you through playing by yourself the game, with just a very basic introduction. And then it says, okay, if you succeeded with a saving throw, jump to page 7. If you failed your saving throw, jump to page 7. If you succeed, jump to page 8. So now you've done a very basic choose your own adventure, and you've got some of the basic mechanics of how to play the game, and you did it by yourself. You didn't have to have a group. You didn't have to get all your friends together to at least get the basic idea. And then it goes through and explains a little more about your character sheet. So it layers on the complexity slowly, a step at a time, as you need it, which is how I usually encourage people to GM. Rather than trying to overload people with the front-end load of rules, just teach them the bare bones to get by and then add complexity as it's needed in the game, and people can handle that a lot better. And then it has you go to town and spend some of your treasure and buy stuff. Then you go back into the adventure on page 14, and then we're doing a little more talking about battling, and then page 15, you go into the caves, and it teaches you to do some basic mapping techniques to keep track of where you are. And then it is just basically a choose your own adventure. It says jump to page number 10, jump to number 41, etc. And so it has that for several pages, this solo adventure. And now you've got a basic experience of what it's like. And then on page 23, it introduces character classes and gives you all these other choices. So now you have some concept of what you're trying to develop for. Hands down, I think this is a much better approach than most of the other games do. And that's not all. But wait, there's more. So that's for introduction for a player. Now let's say you want to game master it. So your friends may not have any role-playing game experience, and somehow you've got to jump in and figure this out yourself. So, page... oops, I think I got... This is the same... it's Player's Manual twice. Darn it. Hang on. It's supposed to be the GM's manual. There it is. All right, so the Dungeon Master's Rulebook from the 1983 Frank Metzer box set is only 48 pages. Right? This is very different than the huge tomes. And it gives you some terms and abbreviations and definitions on page 1, an overview of running the game on page 3, but by page 4 you're already running your first game. So you're getting together some friends, you're using some pre-generated character sheets so you don't have to worry about spending too much time on it, and it walks you through your first group adventure. And it says, start. Read the following to the players. And then it has in big gray boxes what to read. So the stuff in gray you read aloud, and the stuff not in gray are notes to the Dungeon Master. And this is just your classic, railroaded walk you through module, but it really helps you just get the basics down with commentary along the way of good approaches and bad approaches in working with your group. And again, it's at a very basic level. And so you read, for example, many years ago, this part of the realm of man was ruled by a magic user named Gygar, a man of great and mysterious powers. He ruled the lands from his mighty castle Mistamir, located at the foot of the mountains to the north. And it goes on. And then it gives you, it walks you through what to do with the players, what choices to offer them, because they've never played before. So now you've got to introduce them to this. And it just walks you through this. It just says your first game is the name of the chapter. So that starts on page 4. It's got the adventure ends about page 11. Then on page 12 it tells you how to apply experience points and gain levels, and you have your group adventure map on page 13. Then it gets into, in page 14, more advanced procedures and rules, etc. That is such a great way to handhold people, introducing them to a completely new concept of an activity than I've seen in any other role-playing game. Now, I'm sure there are others out there somewhere that follow a similar model, but I haven't stumbled across it since. that not quite that well laid out. And again, it's basic, but it's a really good way to introduce people. What do you guys think of that on that so far?
Yeah, I like it. Is it still available?
Let me check if they have made it. Drive-Thru RPG has some of the old stuff now available on print on demand. You can track it down on Amazon, but it's probably pricey these days. Let's see. 1983 basic Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, like the box set is like going for $90 starting price used, which is way more than what it was then because they're becoming collector's items. But let me see if they have it on. Okay, there's Beck Me because they do have Beck Me, and I think they made some of it print on demand available. Player's manual.
Just one. I have a couple of friends who are complete beginners.
So
yeah, I want to just throw a group together and DM. And
Yep.
I'm like, I'm sure there are resources out
Yep,
there. that
this
they
is
can
by
use.
far. I mean, every edition they've put out a beginner's box set, which is okay if you prepare. It will walk you through how to play that particular version of D&D, and they're adequate. And especially if you have prior experience, then they're perfectly fine. They're good introductions to the new system, and they do just fine. But if you have no concept of what a role-playing game is, they're still a bit overwhelming for people. This is by far the best simple intro. It is available in PDF through Drive-Thru RPG. I'm trying to find out. I swear they've made a hard copy version somewhere. Let's see. The other one, it's not Drive-Thru RPG. It's RPG Now. No, is it RPG Now? I forget the other. Might be this one. Let's see. They're interrelated, so okay. Basic role-playing rule system. No, it's BRP. Basic Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I do know it is available, the compiled version, and actually I haven't checked this. If you look for the Dungeons and Dragons Rules Cyclopedia, this is print on demand. This is all of the BECME reformatted together into one book, which is easier because the other books kind of are a bit messy between all the small books. So the Rules Cyclopedia puts them all together, though it's kind of missing Immortals. You have to get the Immortals stuff separately, but it goes all the way up to just shy of Immortals. But I don't think it has the really great introduction of how to play. I think it follows the format of Advanced D&D and the other books. Let's see. Setting up Cyclopedia, blah, blah, blah. Character classes, spellcasting equipment, rules. Yeah, it just follows the same format as other games. I don't see that it walks you through. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it has all the info, but it doesn't give you a hand-holding start the way the original basic does. Yeah, that's a good question. I would search a little more. I thought it was made available. Let me get rid of a couple of these. There we go. Okay, that's 4th edition. Yeah, don't get confused. They republished 4th edition with the exact same artwork, red box, and the 5th edition. Like, they've reused that concept repeatedly without actually being the same one, and it has confused people. Okay, there's expert. No, I don't. Come on, get out of the way. That pop-up in the way. Not a regular pop-up, just a menu option I don't want. Come on, RPG Now, stop that. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I thought for a while there they were making it available as a print on demand. Let's see, basic Dungeons and Dragons 1983 print on demand. Anybody? Here's print. Oh, that's just the. Well, so they made a lot of the modules print on demand. A lot of the modules are now available print on demand. And AD&D first editions print on demand. But I'm not seeing that exact version. So that's unfortunate, because that is by far the best introduction. So, but paying $80 is not worth it. That's just gouging people. Come on. If you keep your eyes open for a little beat up version, you'll get a better price, of course. And again, the PDF is available, so you can get the PDF, and it would include that the beginning part. So, and that's only $5 for like the player's book, and then another $5 for the DM's guide. So you can certainly do it that way and print it out. And again, it's not a huge thing to deal with. So at least you can get the PDF of that. And I highly recommend it for introduction. And even people who are experienced GMs, I've made them go back and play this. In fact, I'm getting ready to do that to my existing GMs to go, people, let's take you back to the basics, because sometimes you get lost and forget about some of the basics, and you can be a better GM by touching base with those basics. Doesn't mean you want to be limited to that old school style of play, whatever, but you want to remember where some of the roots came from, and it might inspire you with some of that original magic that inspired millions and millions when it was a whole new concept. But that would be the best introduction. It's not the best ongoing. So back to this, Robin's Laws. I submit to you that the most important yet most often forgotten rule of good GMing is this. Number 1, role-playing games are entertainment. Your goal as GM is to make your games as entertaining as possible for all participants. Seems straightforward. Your thoughts?
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple instances, and I'm sure everyone has, where you have to make judgment call. Rules versus fun, I think.
Yep.
So
Every game master has to do that from time to time.
I don't think I ever do well with the rules part.
You might want to check out Amber, the diceless system, Omar. You might like that.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to keep promoting the fact that I barely follow anything.
That's okay.
The game set for it.
Well, we're gonna talk about what player type that is, and that affects GM type as well. There are people who prefer that, and so it's okay as long as everybody's having fun. That's the key thing. So, sure, it sounds pretty obvious, lying there all in italicized on the page like that. It is nonetheless the great, immutable, ironclad law to which the above chapter head alludes. How many times have you sat at the gaming table, bored and struggling, stuck in the middle of a session run by a GM who seems to have lost all touch with this simple principle? How many times have you, as GM, gotten derailed by your pursuit of some seemingly important goal and lost touch yourself with the entertainment value of your game? What was that?
Oh, no, sorry, I coughed.
Oh, okay. The mission of this book is to improve your GMing. No matter how good you are, you can keep getting better. I fully agree with that, and me included. Like all of us, you'll have your good days and your bad. On your good days, inspiration takes hold, and you don't need to think about a theory. You just do it. This book is for the bad days, to give you the technique to get through rough patches. Now, even if this book were so thick that no one would ever want to lift it from the shelf, it couldn't possibly contain every possible useful technique. It probably leaves out some of your favorites. But, specifics aside, you can get yourself out of almost every GMing trap by asking yourself the following question. Number 2. What would be the most entertaining thing that could possibly happen right now? The rest is mere detail. Now, I have a little bit of an addendum to that. So that's his rule number 2. What would be the most entertaining thing that could possibly happen right now? What do you think a good caveat is to that?
I mean, that fits within the story. It fits within the adventure, and it has to fit.
Yeah, it's not something that's just completely random and out of
And
left
then you
field.
got struck by lightning.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a statistical improbability, but alright.
Because especially if you keep doing that, the players are just going to be like, what's the point of us doing anything?
Mhm.
Randomly things happen for no reason.
Right. Well, the most entertaining thing that could possibly happen right now can often lead to Monty Hall style gaming. You familiar with that phrase?
Nah.
Let me see. I should have it in my. It might be on the Spokane RPG site, but let me first check RPG Research. Let's see. Because Monty Hall was a game show thing. So Game Master Archetypes under www. So we haven't moved that over yet. It's under www2. You just type in Monty, Monty, space HAUL. Although I'm not wondering about the spelling now. But so you'll see many different Game Master archetypes I've listed. And one of them is the Monty Hall GM, a variation of the Munchkin GM. So let's start with the Munchkin GM. The Munchkin GM. Having slain the hordes of Azoth single-handedly, without even unsheathing the sword of universal destruction, your half-gray elven, half-gold dragon, 50th level paladin, magic user, cleric, monk, bard, gazes down upon the pitiful Cthulhu who grovels at your feet. That's a Munchkin GM. Monty Hall GM. A variation on the Munchkin GM, but characters tend to be lower level. You are each granted one wish. I wish to have the hand and eye of Vecna. I wish to have the flask of Tony the Merciless. I wish to have... Poof, they appear in front of you. Now what do? This actually happened years ago when we first started playing. That's from the articles these come from. So, yeah, it may be the most entertaining thing to do, but my addendum is... So this is how I would rewrite it. What would be the most entertaining thing that could possibly happen right now without sacrificing the future?
Yep. Yeah, I can see that. Because that definitely goes along with what we were saying.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would both sacrifice the future of the campaign.
Yep.
And sacrificing the future of the player's entertainment value and enjoyment of the campaign.
Yep.
So you definitely need to feel like you have impact over the game.
Yes.
That's one of the main things you do in like a tabletop game. If you take that away,
Some sort of locus of control.
Yep. You got it. Exactly. Locus of control. Because if you feel like it's all random and you have no power, it becomes learned helplessness. If you have no ability, and a lot of people come into gaming actually in their real lives, maybe not a lot, but a number of people I've interviewed and worked with have gone to gaming because in their real lives they feel like they don't have any control or say in all the things that happen to them. They have a very strong external locus of control and don't have a very strong internal locus of control. They feel like life happens to them rather than they have a say in their life. Now, either extreme is unhealthy. If you have too extreme an external locus of control and you say, well, it's fate, I can't do anything about it, you're going to get steamrollered. If you also have too strong an internal locus of control, everything is my fault, everything that goes wrong is because of me, well, you're going to eat yourself up alive for the things you can't control. So it's having that balance between realistic understanding of external and internal, what you do have control over and what you don't. You have control over what you say and do to various degrees. You can't control others. You can't control events around you necessarily. So getting that realization and finding that balance is really important. And in a game where you have a GM who might be domineering or something, you can have players quickly learn, get to a state of helplessness, learned state of helplessness, which is a real problem. Also, you can just make people really paranoid, where they're constantly like they're just traumatized in the game because they don't know what's going to happen next. There's no predictability. And there's a lot of research studies about that, where animals and stuff just will quit when they get zapped randomly and stuff. They'll just even quit trying to get away from the pain if it's completely random and it's hopeless. They just give up. It's really bad. So very important that yes, you want it to be the most fun right now in the context of keeping it in a long-term arc, and making sure that it isn't going to develop a state of being too random and learn state of helplessness. And so that's why I say without sacrificing the future of the game and of their characters, etc. But the general concept he's saying, of course, is right. It's just with that caveat, just saying, okay, yes, but, yes, and take this into account. Okay, let's see here. Back to there. See if anybody, Twitch has any comments. We always welcome the comments there on the stream. All right, how are we doing time? Okay, got half an hour. All right. So, knowing your players. If at least 70% of the success or failure of a gaming session depends on interactions between participants, any preparation to improve your GMing style must begin with a look at the people you'll be playing with. And this is something I do. We have intake assessments. I don't do it with every group by any stretch of the imagination, but I have done full intake where I do genre assessment, player style assessment, complexity preferences, setting preferences, through assessment questions. Even if they've never role-played before, you can ask questions about their media intake, what they like to watch and such, and participate in, that you can extrapolate from towards what would be a good fit for them as an introduction to role-playing gaming if they've never played. Now, if they're an experienced role-playing gamer, they may have already decided, but you might want to see if they might have other interests that they've never tried. Yeah, maybe they've always played D&D and they love that, but maybe they also love a good mystery and have never tried something more in like the Agatha Christie genre or something. And so you might want to introduce them to that as well. And doing these intake assessments gets you a better idea of the player. Now, his assessments here are extremely rudimentary, and they aren't questionnaires. They are game master already knowing the players. So this is very, very basic compared to what we do. But it's good to be thinking about these things. So this is a point almost all published GM advice fails to address. Even good advice tends to address itself to an ideal group who all happen, as a result of marvelous coincidence, to share the same tastes the rules set in question happens to aim at. In reality, though, no group is ideal. Certain players show different degrees of commitment than others. Some face a blizzard of competing commitments and can't show up regularly. All players participate with varying degrees of attention and enthusiasm. Some folks are deferential towards the tastes and desires of their pals, while others see only their own desires. Tastes in role-playing vary considerably. Otherwise, there would be only one role-playing game which everyone would play in the same manner. So, rule number 3. There is only one way to role-play, the way that achieves the best balance between the various desires of your particular group. And don't forget that that includes yourself, by the way. You're part of the group. Thoughts on that rule number 3?
That's one of the hardest ones, I think, personally.
Yeah, it's a guideline. It doesn't solve it.
I know. I understand the struggle that is trying to address.
Mm-hmm.
Is having a bunch of different ideals from your players.
Yep. And have I mentioned before?
One thing might be exciting for one player.
Yes.
That might be completely boring and irrelevant.
Have I mentioned before to you guys the 5 love languages?
Nope.
So it's I was surprised they've started making it regular reading in high school. They have a teenage version now that my boys had to read, but it's by Gary Chapman. And again, it's a very basic concept, but the concept is, so you'll hear, and some of these are based on stereotypes, and that's part of one of the flaws with this approach. Anytime you simplify these things this much, it's a huge generalization. But it has some validity if you start thinking about, so some people like to express their love through giving things or through doing things, and those are two different things. Giving a gift is a different way of expressing love than, fixing something for somebody. Or doing something for somebody. Others like intimacy. They like cuddle time and or a good pat on the back or whatever, or sex or what have you. And then there's other ways. Some really like just good talking and engagement and communication and really, sharing their inner thoughts and such. And these can be, showing their vulnerability as a means of showing how they love someone. And this doesn't have to be romantic love. It can be just friendship, etc. Even just good coworkers and such. And how we expect to receive love may or may not be in the same language. So while we may be a person who gives of themselves, they do things, they help others, they fix things for people, they say people are in trouble, you'll give them a ride, what have you. They may prefer to receive love as verbal, hey, good job, hey, that's great, oh, it's great, I love you, etc., like that. Receive verbal compliments. Or maybe they prefer intimacy, they like the physical contact. They don't really want somebody to do things for them. They like to be the doer, but they like to receive intimacy and love through maybe a more physical method. And those are two different languages. And so what happens is, if you have somebody who gives love through giving items, and the person receiving it likes to receive love through intimacy, and that person likes to show love through doing, and the person on the receiving end of that likes to have nice in-depth verbal affirmations of love, you've got a complete communication breakdown, because you're basically talking Chinese to Finnish, right? You're just talking at each other, and you're not meeting the other person's communication expectations. So these are very short, simple books just on these basic concepts, and they're a good basic concept to start with. Same thing with gamers. You have gamers coming in, and this book goes into quite a bit of depth in it. You have gamers coming in who want adventure. You have gamers who come in wanting role-playing. You have gamers who come in wanting hack and slash. You have gamers coming in who just want to crunch the numbers and master the rules, and tacticians, etc. And if you don't know what languages your players want to play, speak, you can definitely have a lot of communication breakdown and failure within the group. So another book I recommend, very light read, very quick read, worth checking out, just being aware of. Comments, questions on that so far?
No.
Sounds good.
Okay. And same thing to you Twitch viewers as well. If you have any comments, post them in the chat room. I've got it up here. I'll gladly answer. Or if you want to share your own insights, feel free. So, in-game preferences. Everybody comes to the gaming table for slightly different reasons. Our biggest task as GMs is to direct and shape individual preferences into an experience that is more than the sum of its parts. Accepting that each player's preferences and desires should be given roughly equal weight first requires us to compromise on our own tastes. This is easier said than done, as you were just pointing out, Eric. Many of us become game masters in the first place because we want greater control over the gaming experience. Now, I would argue that people, for a lot of different reasons, we want to express our creativity or try out the cool ideas we've had bubbling away in the back of our minds. It's all about striking a balance. If we sacrifice our own tastes too much, we'll get bored, and bored GMs run boring games. On the other hand, the most innovative campaign concept in the world means zip if you can't get your players excited about it. Now, both of you said you've done some GMing. What led you to GMing? First of all, do you prefer to play or GM, Omar? We're talking tabletop here. For this whole document is about tabletop role playing. Did we lose Omar again?
Maybe.
No, Omar.
I guess it happens.
All right, I'll start with you, Eric, while he figures that out. Eric, which do you prefer, playing or GMing?
It's a hard question.
Or mixture, any variant. I do not like. I will propose questions in a simple form. You are always welcome to go outside of. I hate forced choice questions where you have no other options. I often say option C or option E that you didn't list. So feel free to list other feelings that you have in response.
I think I prefer a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I'm much better as a player, in my opinion.
Okay.
But I think GMing is really fun as well.
Yeah.
I feel like I usually come up short as a GM because
Okay.
I tend to under-prepare.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
but I like doing them equally.
Boy, I hope Omar gets reset there. Come on, Omar.
Yeah, Omar is just going to keep breaking. Nobody.
So you like a mix, and what led you to first GMing? I know we've talked about it before, but let's do it in the context of this conversation. Why did you GM the first time? What's that?
Just a lack of GM.
Okay, nobody else would do it.
People who wanted to play, and I was like, well, I'll try it. It can't be too hard, right?
Right.
I mean, it was pretty hard. But,
Yeah.
yeah, it was just the lack of. There always seems to be more players, and I think part of that is there's a responsibility for the GM that people recognize and are afraid of failing people who are playing the game.
Right. Do you think there's any control aspect for you, or is it just that you're just the de facto?
No, it was more just it just happened to me
Yeah.
GM, and I would volunteer.
Right. Okay. Omar, you're back now?
Yeah, sorry, the internet. I don't know what's wrong with it. It's just gonna keep doing that, I guess.
Yeah. So something I do before each meeting is I go reset my cable modem and stuff before, because sometimes that can clear out
I've
the.
never had an issue with Discord before.
Okay.
As you know from other meetings.
Yeah. No, Discord's been fine. I wonder if it's just your internet,
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe there's like too much pressure tonight. I don't know.
because it's not happening between Eric and I. We're not losing the connection. It's just on your end. So you might want to reset your router next time before a meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, just in case. Helps clear the ARP cache. And yes, ARP is actually a term. So the question was, what led you... well, first of all, which do you prefer, game mastering or playing? Or...
Play.
Okay, you prefer playing. What led you to... What's that?
Hands down, no comparison.
Okay. What led you to be your game master the first time?
I was pushed into it
Right?
multiple times because it's just everyone, for some reason, wanted me to do it.
Right.
Because they had never not even played an RPG game.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted me to do it because they were like, oh, you have more experience with explaining a whole
Right.
campaign.
So, same thing as...
No
Eric.
enjoyment.
Same thing as Eric. It was a de facto thing. It wasn't something because you wanted more control, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do like coming up with the stories for the campaign. I just hate actually enacting them.
Okay.
'Cause I feel like a playing teacher for a day, trying to rein everyone in.
Okay. Well, that's rough when you have a group that does that much work. So this particular author comes from the perspective that game masters are all control freaks, which I disagree with. Yes, there are control freak game masters out there without a doubt. I have a similar background to you guys in that, I first started playing. A cousin introduced me to it when I was like 7 years old or something back in 1977, and then some years later I started game mastering. Partly because people just started either asked me to or nobody else. We didn't have the game master. We lost the game master, but we all still wanted to play. Who's willing to try to game master? And I kept getting selected because when I role played, I would really get into it. I really played my character richly, and for whatever reason, people kept asking me to GM, and I wanted to play. I was like, that's a lot of work, but all right. And so I kept becoming the de facto game master, and then as I got better at it, and word got around about my game mastering, then people really insisted that they wanted to be in my group as a player with me as the GM specifically. I also like a mix. I really do like to. I would like to play a lot more than I get to. I probably lately, the last couple months, because John and others have been stepping up, and I've been able to play a little bit more in the evaluation, like when we do Monday and Thursday game evaluations and such. So that lets me get to play a little more, but I'm in evaluative mode. I'm giving game masters feedback on how to be better, etc. So it's not quite the same. Normally, it's about 90% GM, 10% player is what I end up in my time of GMing in any given year, or playing in any given year. But I would much rather it was probably more 50-50, maybe 60, 70% play and 30, 40% GM. It was never about control for me. It was, again, de facto, and I just wanted to have the most fun in the activity possible. I'm more than happy to be the player and let somebody else have all the control and be the game master if they're a good game master. But if they're not a good game master, I have a low threshold of tolerance. I will not stay in a group with a game master I'm not enjoying. I'll do a one shot and then I won't come back. What's that?
I think part of the reason that I don't really care which I play is I would rather just everyone have a good experience.
Yeah.
So if my dungeon mastering would help people have a good experience, then so be it. If I can play and still everyone's gonna have a good time, then that's fine too. I think it mostly comes from hoping that everyone can just have a good time.
Totally agree. And that fits rule number 1. Make your game as entertaining as possible for all participants. Yeah, so again, this author really harps on GMs as control freaks, and so I just want to really make clear, there are GMs who are control freaks. I don't think that's the majority of GMs. It might be the case for mainstream GMs who are in organized play, and you've got plenty of control freaks out there. But I really don't. I mean, it's impossible to do an accurate survey because, again, players are elusive. But an awful lot of game masters I met have similar experience. They're like, well, I GM because nobody else will, and I want to just have fun with the game. And, as long as we're having fun, I'll do it, but I'd rather play. And they don't get to because they're just as short as your GMs. So I don't agree with his premise outright that all, as he says, many of us become game masters in the first place because we want greater control over the gaming experience. And yes?
How does he... You don't really have that... I know you make technically the story up, but it's up to them to decide what really happens.
It depends on what the game master allows.
Yeah, but most of the games I've played, it's when I'm not the game master, it's been a lot the players take charge.
Right, and that totally depends on the GM style.
So I think him assuming that all of them do this is a bit odd.
Right, and it's that is one style of play, which he will talk the different styles here, where there's more GM control versus more player control. I like the players to have more say. He talks about how rule systems affect that. I actually disagree with him inversely about what gives players more control and less control, but again, these are great topics of conversation. So he says all about striking a balance, and of course we want to make sure that everybody's having a good time. All right. It's all well and good to talk about the things that the average player generally enjoys, but nobody's group is average, and being generally satisfied is not good enough. The key to great GMing is to figure out what each of your players wants, and then to find a gaming style that contains a little something for everybody, including yourself. I strongly agree with that. To pin this down more precisely, fill in a copy of the player goal chart, see below. It asks you to think about the types your players fall into and the emotional experiences they seek from the game. So I'm going to hold this up to the camera. I know it'll take a little bit to show up on Twitch. But it says player goal chart. There's a column for player, a column for type, and then a column for emotional kick. It's just very, very basic. And this is an evaluation of your... Oh my goodness, this other camera's in the way. Can't get it in the right position. How am I going to do this? An evaluation of your players that you happen to know. But that requires you having some experience with them, So this assumes that. And you as the game master fill out this chart, not the players. I do it where I have the players do self-assessments on broader questions, and then that helps answer a lot of these questions, topics he's going to bring up. So the next heading is player types, but I inserted archetypes and he even mentions that word later. So people play role-playing games for all sorts of reasons, but a few basic types tend to recur in large numbers. Note I didn't invent these categories, many of which originate with the late Glenn Blacow, B-L-A-C-O-W. You guys should research that. I think that's the three-part series, the three parts theory about role-playing gaming. He departs from the I have departed a bit from the traditional list though. So he lists the power gamer. I also call them min-maxers. wants to make his character bigger, tougher, buffer, and richer. However, success is defined by the rules system you're using. This player wants more of it. This player tends to see their PC as an abstraction, as a collection of superpowers optimized for the acquisition of still more superpowers. They pay close attention to the rules, with a special eye to finding quirks and breakpoints they can exploit to get large benefits at comparatively low costs. They want you to put the game back in the term role-playing game and to give them good opportunities to add shiny new abilities to their character sheet. And so it's kind of a mix between a min-maxer and a rules lawyer. What do you guys think of that, the power gamer?
Oh, I know.
Oh, yeah. Don't we all? Omar?
Yeah. Definitely met a couple. It's not the majority, but yeah.
Yeah. None of these
Also
are...
known as the elitist.
Yeah, there's, different names. The Butt Kicker, a.k.a. Murder Hobo is what I would call it, wants to let off steam with a little old-fashioned vicarious mayhem. They pick a simple combat-ready character, whether or not that is the best route to power and success in the system. After a long day in the office or classroom, they want their character to clobber foes and once more prove their superiority over all who would challenge them. They may care enough about the rules to make their PC an optimal engine of destruction, or may be indifferent to them, so long as they get to hit things. They expect you to provide their character plenty of chances to engage in the aforementioned clobbering and superiority. Thoughts, comments?
My favorite archetype to GM, actually, because you know exactly what they're going to do, so you can...
They're easy to satisfy, yeah. That's an easy one to satisfy.
No, you can also make them take the story in a specific way, because you know what actions they're going to take.
Sure.
Because they're so blood hungry.
Yep. Eric?
I mean, seems fairly straightforward.
Okay.
I agree. I've seen this archetype before.
Okay. The tactician, which also can overlap with the rules lawyer type, depending if they're more of a rules lawyer arguer or not, is probably a military buff who wants chances to think their way through complex, realistic problems, usually those of the battlefield. They want the rules and your interpretations of them to jibe with reality as they know it, or at least to portray an internally consistent, logical world in which the quality of their choices is the biggest determining factor to their success or failure. They may view issues of characterization as a distraction. They may become annoyed when other players do things which fit their PC's personalities but are tactically unsound. To satisfy them, you must provide challenging yet logical obstacles for this character to overcome. Thoughts and comments?
The most annoying archetype for me personally to play with is either another player or a DM.
Okay.
I don't think I've played with one. I played with rules lawyer a lot.
Okay. If you watch any of our Monday, Thursday streams, Dan is a self-admitted tactician. He's less of a rules lawyer than Bill and some others, but he's very much a tactician. He is all about figuring out the tactical situation and really maximizing it, and he really likes those.
I'm that way in video games.
Okay.
I'll try to figure out, okay, let's optimize, you know.
Okay.
Let's get the best strategy under our belt.
Mm-hmm.
But in role-playing games, specifically tabletop, I'm definitely not.
Okay.
I'm like, let's keep the story moving. And
Right.
I think tacticians can get so far into figuring out what they want to do.
Okay.
That it's completely halts the progress of. I'm not saying that there's not a level that is.
But that's an important.
necessary, and that's fine. But
Yeah, and that's an important point you make. For you, it stops the game. For the tactician, it makes the game. So what do you do as a GM to satisfy these diametrically opposed differences? And we'll talk about that.
Don't have them in your game.
What's that?
get rid of them.
No.
Have them in your game.
We want to make it work for everybody. We want to be inclusive.
I do. Nothing makes me like hate a game more or be bored than someone spending 45 minutes just discussing a technicality.
Yeah, well, that's rules lawyer often too. Yeah, I agree. They kill games.
Like they're not doing it for fun. I don't fully.
It's
I know why they're doing it.
for rules lawyers. My theory is rules lawyers are mostly anxiety based. It's they often feel out of control in their real world life, and and so they play the game to feel more in control. We were talking about that before, the locus of control. And if you mess with that, that just causes them a huge amount of anxiety. They are often type A type personalities, but they also have a lot of anxiety. And the way I've been able to get rules lawyers to stop becoming disruptive and become helpful to the game is to look at it as an anxiety disorder. And if I treat it that way, they become very useful, and you assuage their anxiety. They become it calms down their upset, and instead of being disruptive, they can be an ally. So my theory is they're anxiety based, and when I treat it as such, that seems to solve it. They've stopped disrupting the game, so that seems to fit. The specialist favors a particular character type, which they play in every campaign in every setting. The most common subtype of specialist is the player who wants to be a ninja every time. Other specialists might favor knights, cat people, mischief makers, flying characters, or wistful druid maidens who spend a lot of time hanging about sylvan glades with fairies and unicorns. The specialist wants the rules to support their favored character type, but is otherwise indifferent to them. To make a specialist happy, you have to create scenes in which their character can do the cool things for which the archetype is known. Are you back, Omar?
Yeah.
Okay, that seemed to work. So that's the specialist. You guys ever known players like that? I don't know if you're experienced enough to have run into that yet.
I might be a little bit of a specialist.
Yeah? Like no matter what game, always play Bubbles the clown in every setting, you know.
Right. I'm always a summoner. I'm like, how can I get the most minions to fight for me in
Okay.
every game?
Okay.
That's kind of what I do.
Interesting.
But I mean, I think all the archetypes fall.
There can often be some overlap, yeah. Oh yeah, there's often overlap. Remember we talked about
Extreme, like pure
Yes.
forms.
Yes, and remember, we talked about the difference between stereotype and archetype. Stereotype is restricting. You're limited. All people of this group exhibit only these behaviors. Archetype is a baseline description of traits that can be expanded upon and is on a spectrum and can have other archetypes over as well. So archetypes are a baseline that can expand. Stereotypes limit. The method actor believes that role-playing is a medium for personal expression, strongly identifying with the character they play. They may believe that it's creatively important to establish a radically different character each time out. The method actor bases their decisions on an understanding of their character's psychology and may become obstructive if other group members expect them to contradict their psychology for rules reasons or in pursuit of a broader goal. They may view rules as, at best, a necessary evil, preferring sessions in which the dice never come out of their bags. Situations that test or deepen their personality traits are your key to entertaining the method actor. Comments?
That's definitely my archetype.
What's that?
That's definitely my archetype.
Okay. Maybe and we'll get in the storyteller as well. Yeah, that might fit as well. Eric?
No, I mean, I see all these archetypes in myself.
Mm-hmm. What about with other people? Have you run into any extreme method actor types?
No.
Okay.
No, definitely. This is one I haven't seen as much of.
Interesting. Okay. I've run into many of them over the years. They tend to shy away from games like Dungeons and Dragons and such that are more murder hobo tactician type. They don't like that. That you'd see them more in Vampire and other more freeform role-playing games. The storyteller, like the method actor, is more inclined to the role-playing side of the equation and less interested in numbers and experience points. On the other hand, they're more interested in taking part in a fun narrative that feels like a book or a movie than in strict identification with their character. They're quick to compromise if it moves the story forward, and may get bored when the game slows down for a long planning session. You can please them by introducing and developing plot threads, and by keeping the action moving, as would any skilled novelist or film director. So, Eric, you were commenting about how you like the story to keep going. You don't like the rules lawyer to kill the story. I know, Mari, you were talking about that too. Would you say, you guys...
Sorry, you were cut out there.
Oh, what did you hear?
I was commenting.
Yeah, you were commenting on how you don't like a tactician to kill the action. You want the story to keep going.
Yeah.
And Omar, you were commenting the same thing about, if somebody quibbling over some detail for 45 minutes, stopping the story progressing.
Yes, although I do tend to pay attention to the game as well, the game mechanics. I don't ignore those. I just don't like it when the story's. So like,
I recognize there has to be some discussion.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of metagaming is okay. A little bit of player discussion is fine. It's when it gets to the extreme cases.
Well, this isn't talking about exposition or metagaming. This is just that there's a story progressing, that it's moving along like a movie or a book. Who cut out?
Oh, that was Omar.
Okay.
I'll keep doing that.
Yeah, so that there's a story, there's a progression to the story, not that you're doing exposition or meta discussion, just that it has a progressing story, not that it's just like one game, it's just a dungeon crawl where there's no real story to it. You're just crawling through, killing things and solving puzzles. And that's great for tacticians and rules lawyers and such. And it's not necessarily about, how richly can I define the background of my character and the agonized internal debate of my moral self, which is the method actor. There's a story, there's a plot, there's a progression to the story, and they like to keep that moving along like a movie or TV show or a book or something.
Oh, so this would be a problem more with one-off campaigns usually. It's a longer-term archetype than some of the other ones.
You can have a story in one session. As long as there's a good storyline in one session, you can have that.
I guess that is true. I can see that.
Yeah, but
I
they
don't have much of a problem with this. I don't think I've seen it come up.
Okay.
Because most of the groups that I've had fine moving stories, and no one's ever commented. So
okay.
At least I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, this might be an issue with a lot more experienced people, because if you're doing it for people who play a lot of RPGs, you usually will always do a story.
Mm-hmm.
And not just let's do a dungeon crawl just to level up our characters.
Well, that's going to totally depend on your players. Some people are going to want it more a board game-like experience where a dungeon crawl they can relate to more. Others are going to like the more storyboard effect. It's going to depend.
True. Personally, I've never really come across people who want just a dungeon crawl.
Okay.
I think they go for it for the storytelling element.
Right. And that may be some self-selection of...
Story.
Right, and that might... And do you play mostly with your friends, or do you play with strangers?
Oh yeah, no, I would be awful at GM strangers.
Right, so you're playing with friends, and so there's a self-selection there that is happening.
Yes, which is why things tend to go as smoothly as they do, because I know vaguely what direction they'll kind of take.
Sure.
I know them.
Right. Yep.
As opposed to if it was a stranger, I would not know what to do.
Right. Have you ever played in any kind of pickup game where it's nobody you knew and you just joined a game to play?
No.
Okay. We might challenge you to find that at some point, just as an experience for you to write about.
That would be. I'm kind of a impulsive ADD gamer, so hopefully it doesn't annoy everyone else.
You might have to work on that.
Yeah, because with RPGs, again, I just enjoy doing a character and storytelling.
Right.
Someone just wants to slow down and look at numbers.
Yep.
I just get so bored.
I understand. So you would want to ask around about you might want to interview the game master, see what their preferred style is. All right, we're a little bit over on time, but I want to get through this last archetype that he talks about, and then we'll call it good for today. The casual gamer is often forgotten. This is an important one. I like he brought this one. This is not one I had really thought of as a separate archetype, but actually I think he makes a good point. and so we have added it to our list of archetypes with the player archetype specialist training. The casual gamer is often forgotten in discussions of this sort, but almost every group has one. Casual gamers tend to be low-key folks who are uncomfortable taking center stage even in a small group. Often they're present to hang out with the group, and game just because it happens to be the activity everyone else has chosen. Though they're elusive creatures, casual gamers can be vitally important to a gaming group's survival. They fill out the ranks, which is especially important in games that spread vital PC abilities across a wide number of character types or classes. Especially if they're present mostly for social reasons, they may fill an important role in the group's interpersonal dynamic. Often they're the mellow, moderating types who keep the more assertive personalities from each other's throats, in or out of character. I mention the casual player because the thing he most fervently wants is to remain in the background. They don't want to have to learn rules. Wait for Omar to come back. Welcome back. What did you last hear me say?
Oh, no, just a sentence ago.
Okay, so often they're mellow, moderating types who keep the more assertive personalities from each other's throats, in or out of character. I mention the casual player because the thing they most fervently want is to remain in the background. They don't want to have to learn rules or come up with a plot hook for their character or engage in detailed planning. You may think it's a bad thing that they sit there for much of the session thumbing through your latest purchases from the comic book store, but hey, that's what they want. The last thing you want to do is force them into a greater degree of participation than they're comfortable with. Of course, if everybody in the group is sitting there reading your comic books, you've definitely got a problem. So, in this assessment of these types, he gives a quick rundown of the emotional kick for each of these. So the types will only get you so far. Many people defy categorization. I strongly agree with that. Most display traits of more than one type. All of us have our own individual quirks, which can be even more important than the style category we fall into. Even so, the exercise of matching your players to the categories helps you to start thinking about what they want from the game. And that's the key important thing, is looking for these traits. And that's what we train our player archetype specialists to know, is they watch and look for these traits. And it's just a good exercise, just like mindfulness and such can be. So in the next calming worksheet, you go one step further and ask yourselves what emotion each of the players wants to experience in the course of the game. Power gamers generally want to feel a sense of reward. Butt kickers seek the flush of martial victory. Tacticians want to feel clever. Specialists' emotional kicks depend on the sort of characters they typically play. Ninja players like to feel sneaky and untouchable. Fairy princesses want a chance to be mystical and alluring. Players of knights want chances to feel noble and righteous. Even if you can't exactly see what draws Joe to play fish people all the time, or Janine to always want to fly, it's easy enough to see what they want. Specialists want chances to play out their characters' defining traits, whatever they might be. Method actors want to feel an intense emotional connection to their characters, as brought about by the dilemmas they face in the course of the game. They're concerned not so much with what their PCs do as with why they do it. Storytellers want the overall game to move quickly and resemble a fictional narrative. If you can involve a storyteller's PC in an ongoing subplot, advancing it slightly every session, so much the better. Don't worry about the casual gamer. If they start to show greater involvement in the game, by all means, figure out what they like and give them more of it. Otherwise, let them be. And so those are some interesting highlights there. So I'm going to wrap it up with this last 3 paragraphs. Becoming conscious of what you already do. Another question we have to ask ourselves as we strive to better our techniques is whether GMing is a talent or a skill. So we're talking nature versus nurture here in a way. In other words, is it an innate ability that some of us have and some of us don't, a talent, or is it something we can learn, a skill? My argument is that at this point in the development of the hobby, it's a talent. Now, I would say it's a little bit of both, but that's fine. He's talking also back in 2002. Those who do well at it are good because they happen to already possess the qualities like creativity, an intuitive grasp of narrative, and sensitivity to group dynamics that the task requires. However, by finding concrete ways to teach and enhance those qualities, we turn it more into a skill. Sure, There are a few people whose minds work in a way that prevents them from ever acquiring the necessary qualities. The vast majority of us, though, can benefit by performing exercises that build imagination, narrative intuition, and so on. The first step, then, in becoming a better game master is to look at the things you do unconsciously as part of your talent for GMing, analyze them, and start to do them more purposefully and systematically. For example, most of us, to some degree, unconsciously take into account the varying tastes of each individual member of the playing group. Almost no one follows the step-by-step process laid out in the main text. I sure didn't until someone happened to commission me to write an article on the subject. So you may be better than the vast majority of GMs with very strong, unconsciously expressed talent. Even so, you'll be surprised at the benefits you can reap from conscious evaluation of the good things you're already doing. And that's a big part of what therapy is about in general, is taking a lot of these unconscious acts that we just run on automatic and stopping and becoming aware of them, and then learning how to gain control over them and use them, to a healthier way. Same thing with any profession. Okay, that's because I got too far from the mic. As I said, that's related to therapy, which is turning what unconscious automatic responses, starting to become aware of them, and then learning to have control and improve the areas that you need to improve. The first step is becoming aware of them rather than just being automatic and unconscious. So any final thoughts or comments before we wrap it up for this session?
No. I think, all of these archetypes especially are just the distilled pure forms are probably where people have the most issues GMing and being part of a group with. Because a lot of these archetypes, are parts of individuals.
And as long as they're not disruptive and you're meeting everybody's needs a little bit, then it works out okay. It's when they're too extreme and become disruptive that you really have to worry about that. And that's why we have player archetype specialists. And we have more than 20 archetypes that we list in our resources. That the training manual we're putting together for player archetype specialists has more than 20 archetypes they have to learn to recognize the traits to. Omar?
No comments from me.
Okay. All right. Well, so that got us through page 5. So when we resume, we can pick up at page 6 and continue from there. So for next week, let's remember, start looking through the research and writing down ideas that are triggered related to your research topic. And remember, 2 weeks from now, you want to have a basic outline and abstract to send to me. If you get further along, then great, more power to you. But let's continue trying to finish that moving of the old data from the old site to the new site. And I will be continuing to dig up the ones that don't have the full text and trying to get the hard copies for those that don't have e-text. And I'll be adding the e-text to the ones you have transferred that are placeholders. So just keep doing what you're doing there. And we'll check in next week and we'll continue with this conversation. Did you find this helpful so far as that discussion from that book?
Yeah, it's starting to tie back into what all the other facets of the RPG research are going to.
Yep.
Or parts of. So
It's all interconnected.
on a side note,
yes.
As far as moving stuff, Omar, I've noticed that some of the documents aren't necessarily named super well. So there still may be stuff in there. I've been trying to rename stuff that has like 0984-6 so that they are the actual title of what is inside of them, I guess. So what I'm saying is, if you're still missing stuff, or if you have stuff that you're looking for on it, it may just be hidden under another name.
Okay, although the full text indexing should still pull it up, but that's good.
Right.
Thank you for that. Keep doing that. That sounds good.
Yeah, I'll double check everything.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. Any last things you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
No.
All right. I hope. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope you guys found that productive. And those watching the stream or listening to this uploaded after, and our Patreon supporters, thank you very much. If you're not yet a donor, please consider donating at rpgresearch.com. Click on donate or just /donate. If you're a monthly subscriber through Patreon, you get a whole bunch of bonus hero points for our Sunday show, Heroes of the Mist, which helps you actually be audience interactive member of the game. And you get access to all these recorded, higher quality local videos get uploaded to our Patreon supporters a month or more before the general public to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/RPGresearch. Thank you, Omar in Saudi Arabia, and Eric here in Spokane, and those of you who are watching the stream and later, wherever you may be well and happy gaming. Namarie.